She teased, "Rich men don't know how to please a woman." Mafia boss leaned in and said, "Wanna bet?" The smell of stale beer, burnt garlic, and despair clung to Carmela's trattoria like a shroud. It was a smell Tessa Morano knew better than her own name. At 2 in the morning on a Tuesday, the scent was particularly ripe, mixing with the sharp tang of ammonia as she mopped the warped wooden floor. Carmela's was a relic, a sinking ship in a part of Clearhaven the city maps preferred to forget. The red checkered tablecloths were faded to a dull pink, and half the neon tubes in the trattoria sign outside were dead, leaving it to flicker a mournful tra-ria into the night. Tessa was supposed to be a chef. Her hands, currently raw from bleach water, were trained to julienne vegetables with surgical precision, to balance flavors so complex they could make you weep. She had a scholarship once, a future, once now. She had this slinging drinks, wiping down counters, and praying her apron covered the fresh, ugly bruise painting her left rib. She worked with a coiled vigilance, a tightness in her shoulders that never truly unwound. Every time the heavy oak door opened, her head would snap up, her heart lurching into her throat, her eyes scanning for a face she prayed she would never see again. Vincent was out. He had been out for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of her walking home with her keys fanned between her knuckles, of jumping at shadows, of sleeping with a 10-pound cast-iron skillet on her nightstand. Vincent hadn't found her yet, but Clearhaven wasn't that big. He had been the one to ruin her finances, to isolate her from her family, to convince her she was worthless. And he was the one who had given her the bruise on her rib just before he was sent away for assault. He called it a love tap. Tonight, the bar was mercifully empty. Save for one last table, 4 men in suits that cost more than her yearly rent. They were loud, sloppy, finance something, celebrating some mythical slaughter on the market. They were the kind of men Tessa despised more than the rats in the alley, the kind who confused power with permission. And I tell him, I say, the bonus better be 7 figures, or I walk, bellowed the one with the gelled back hair. Another round for my boys, another one slurred, snapping his fingers in her direction. Not miss, not excuse me, just the snap. Tessa refilled their expensive whiskey, her face a mask of polite indifference. Her feet throbbed. She just wanted to go home, lock her 3 deadbolts, and fall into the lumpy mattress she called a bed. "Hey, sweetheart," the snap-finger one said, his eyes tracing the line of her faded T-shirt. "You're too pretty to be working in a dump like this. You should come work for me. My assistant." "I'm very generous." Tessa just poured the whiskey, her hand steady. "That'll be $96, sir." He laughed, a wet, unpleasant sound, and threw a platinum card on the table. "You know, a woman like you just haven't been provided for, haven't been treated right. You get with a guy like me, you'd never have to mop a floor again." The bitterness that lived in Tessa's stomach, a constant sour burn, rose up. It was the exhaustion, the fear of Vincent, the stench of bleach, and this man's smug, easy confidence. It all coalesced into a single sharp spark. She ran the card, her voice flat and cold. "You know, I've met a lot of men who think their bank account makes them a god, but I've learned one thing." She slid the card and the receipt back onto the table, finally meeting his gaze. The mask was gone. "Rich men don't know how to please a woman." The table went silent. The man's face, slick with alcohol and arrogance, tightened. He looked like she'd slapped him. "What did you just say to me?" Tessa didn't back down. She was so tired of backing down. "I said, your card was approved. Sign here." A low voice, smooth and dark as the whiskey they were drinking, cut through the tension from the end of the bar. "Wanna bet?" Tessa's head turned. She hadn't even seen him. He was sitting in the darkest booth, the one Carmela always said was bad for business because it was too shadowed. He had been there, she realized, for hours, hadn't ordered a thing, just a glass of water, untouched. He wasn't like the finance bros. His suit was dark, bespoke and quiet. It didn't scream money, it whispered power. He was lean, with a face that looked like it had been carved from hard, unforgiving stone. His eyes, even in the dim light, were sharp and unnervingly still. He looked at her not like the finance bro did, not like a piece of meat, but like a puzzle he was slowly solving. He pushed himself out of the booth and walked toward her. He moved with a lethal, fluid grace. Like a panther, the finance brothers, who had been seconds from exploding at her, suddenly seemed to shrink in their seats. They didn't look at him, but they felt him. The entire bar felt him. He stopped a foot from her, much too close. He smelled of expensive wool, cold night air, and something metallic she couldn't place. "Wanna bet?" he repeated, his voice a low rumble. Tessa stared up at him. He was tall, but it was more than that. He was an eclipse, blotting out the light. She could feel the danger rolling off him in palpable waves. This was not a man who celebrated on the market. This was a man who owned the market. Tessa, still running on adrenaline and exhaustion, held her ground. "I'm not betting on anything. I'm closing." She expected him to push, to smirk, to make a pass. He just held her gaze, those quiet, assessing eyes stripping her bare. He saw the bruise she was hiding. He saw the fear of Vincent. He saw the scholarship and the skillet. She felt, in that one long second, completely and terrifyingly seen. A small, dangerous smirk touched the corner of his mouth. It didn't reach his eyes. "So you are." He turned, not to the finance bros, but to the door. As he passed their table, he dropped a single, black $100 bill onto it. "For the girl's trouble," he said, his voice carrying easily. "And gentlemen, you're done." It wasn't a request. The finance bros, suddenly sober, fumbled for their wallets and coats. They were gone in 30 seconds. Dario Ventresca, a name whispered in Clearhaven, a name that meant to shadows and silence and deals made in blood, paused at the door. He looked back at Tessa, who was still standing, tray in hand, her heart hammering against her bruised rib. He just nodded once, a curt, dismissive gesture, and was gone. The night swallowed him whole. Tessa finished closing in a daze, her hands shaking. She scrubbed the encounter from her mind. He was just another rich guy, albeit a scarier one, an ego, that's all. She had her own monsters to worry about. The walk home was 8 blocks. 8 blocks of cracked pavement, burnt-out streetlights, and the constant skittering sound of things moving in the dark. She clutched her keys, the metal biting into her palm. Halfway, in the stretch by the abandoned textile mill, she felt it, the prickle on her neck, the feeling of being watched. She sped up, the footsteps behind her, muffled but distinct, sped up too. Not Vincent, please, not Vincent. She ducked into the alley that cut behind the old bakery, a shortcut she usually avoided, but tonight, panic made her stupid. It was a dead end of graffiti and overflowing dumpsters. She spun around, keys held high. "Leave me alone!" A man emerged from the shadows, not Vincent, but just as bad. He was gaunt, eyes wide and wired, a dirty beanie pulled low. He smiled, showing a row of broken teeth. "Just want to talk, pretty girl. Maybe you got some cash for me, or something else." He lunged. Tessa reacted on instinct, driving her knee up, but he was fast, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her against the brick wall. Her head cracked back. Stars exploded in her vision. He fumbled at her apron, his other hand covering her mouth, the smell of cheap vodka and sweat filling her lungs. She screamed against his palm, kicking, fighting. Just be still," he hissed. "Just be." He stopped. His entire body went rigid, his hands still tangled in her hair, froze, his eyes, wide with junky panic, were fixed on something over her shoulder. A long, black sedan had glided to the mouth of the alley, its engine utterly silent. It was a void, a block of polished night. The headlights weren't on, but the streetlight caught the sheen of its perfect, black paint. Dario Ventresca stepped out of the passenger side. He didn't have a weapon, he didn't run. He just stood there, in his perfect suit, and looked. He looked at the man holding Tessa. The man's breath hitched into a sob. He released Tessa so fast she collapsed to the ground, her knees scraping the gravel. I was just... The man stammered, holding his hands up. Dario took one slow step into the alley. He didn't look at Tessa. His eyes were locked on the attacker. He didn't say a word. The attacker turned and scrambled, climbing the chain-link fence at the end of the alley with the desperate strength of pure terror. He cut himself on the barbed wire at the top, shrieking, and disappeared into the darkness. The silence that fell was heavier, more terrifying, than the attack. Tessa was on her hands and knees, gasping, her hair falling into her face. She was covered in grime, shaking so badly she couldn't stand. The car door opened again, and a different man, broad-shouldered and built like a brick wall, got out. He walked to Dario, said something low Tessa couldn't hear. Dario just shook his head, his gaze finally landing on Tessa. She pushed herself up, fueled by a sudden, white-hot rage that eclipsed the fear. What was that? Were you following me? He just watched her, his face impassive. Get out of here, she screamed, her voice cracking. I didn't ask for your help. I don't need your help. She swiped at the tears of frustration on her face. Go! Stay out of my business! Dario Ventresca looked at her, this wild, filthy, furious woman shouting at him in a dark alley. He looked at her torn apron, her bleeding knees, the keys still clutched in her white-knuckled fist. He took one step toward her. She flinched, expecting a blow, a grab, something. He just straightened his tie. His voice was soft, but it cut through the night air. Then don't leave trails that scream, help me. He turned, got back into the silent car, and was gone. Tessa stood there for a long time before her legs finally gave out. The next day, she woke up feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. Every part of her ached. She was late for her shift. She stumbled into Carmela's at noon, expecting a lecture. Instead, she found Carmela, the bar's owner, a stout woman in her 60s with a perpetually worried face, crying at the bar. Carmela, what's wrong? What is it? Tessa, child, Carmela said, wiping her eyes. She held up 2 pieces of paper. I don't understand. One was a notice from the city, the bar's liquor license, which was due to be revoked in 2 days over unpaid fees, had been fully reinstated. Anonymous tip. It said, clerical error. The other was a receipt from the bank. The bar's rent, 3 months in arrears, had been paid in full. All $9,000. Who? Tessa whispered, the blood draining from her face. I don't know, Carmela said, her voice trembling. The bank manager just said the wire came in this morning, from an investment firm. He said the man who arranged it. He only gave his initial, duh. Tessa felt the floor tilt. Don't leave trails that scream, help me. He hadn't just followed her. He had investigated her. He knew where she worked. He knew the bar's finances. He had, in the span of 12 hours, pulled her entire life from the brink of collapse. She wasn't saved. She was bought. That night, she worked in a fog. The fear of Vincent was gone, replaced by a new, colder, more profound dread. She was waiting. At 10 o'clock, he came in. The bar was half full, but a bubble of silence formed around him as he entered. He walked to the same booth, the dark one. Tessa watched, her stomach in knots. He didn't order, he didn't look at his phone, he just sat, one hand resting on the table, and watched her. He watched her pour beers. He watched her wipe the counter. He watched her take orders, his gaze a heavy, physical weight on her skin. It wasn't lecherous, like the finance bros. It was possessive. It was the look of a man who had just purchased a very expensive, very broken thing and was deciding if it was worth the repair. By midnight, Tessa couldn't take it anymore. The rage from the alley returned, tenfold. This was her life. This was her mess. He had no right. She slammed a bottle of beer onto the pass-through to the kitchen. Gino, cover the bar, she snapped. She stalked through the swinging doors into the stainless steel kitchen. Her kitchen. She grabbed a dish rag, her hands shaking. She could feel him. He had followed her. She spun around. He was standing in the doorway, blocking the only way out, filling the frame. What do you want? She spat. You're out of calamari, he said, his voice calm. You should update the board. The sheer mundane audacity of it broke her. You think you can just buy me, pay off the bar, follow me home, and then just sit there like you own me? I don't want your money. I don't want your help. She was shouting now, her voice echoing off the tile. I know who you are. I've heard the whispers. Dario Ventresca. You think because you're some boss, you can just... She was crying. She realized. Hot, angry tears. She wiped at them, furious at her own weakness. Take your money back. I don't want it. I don't want you here. Dario just stood there, letting her words crash over him. He was a stone wall. He didn't move, didn't flinch. He just watched her break. When she was finished, panting and shaking, the kitchen was silent except for the hum of the freezer. He took a slow step into the room. I am not here for thanks, he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear it. He stopped, just out of her reach. And I don't want your gratitude. I don't care about the money. I don't care about this bar. He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in those cold, still eyes. It wasn't pity. It was something darker, something like recognition. I'm here, he said, because something about you won't let me look away. Tessa's breath caught in her throat, the anger, the fear. It all evaporated, leaving her cold and exposed. He wasn't threatening her. He wasn't propositioning her. He was confessing, and his honesty was more terrifying than any threat he could have made. Dario Ventresca's confession hung in the kitchen air, thick and heavy as the smell of old grease. Something about you won't let me look away. It was not an absolution. It was a claim. Tessa didn't sleep that night. She sat on her lumpy mattress, the cast-iron skillet in her lap, and stared at the door, her 3 deadbolts suddenly feeling as flimsy as cardboard. She was no longer just afraid of Vincent. She was now terrified of his new, silent protector. Dario hadn't saved her. He had just put her in a different, more expensive cage. Life, however, has a brutal way of forcing routine. The sun rose. She went to work. Carmela, buoyed by their sudden solvency, was scrubbing the bar top with a vigor Tessa hadn't seen in years. He's a good man, this D, Carmela said, not looking at Tessa. A little intense, but a good man. He likes your cooking. Kara. Tessa just grunted, hauling a case of new, high-shelf vodka into the storeroom. Dario hadn't just paid their debts. He'd restocked their entire bar. 2 days later, Gino, the part-time cook, came in for his shift, looking pale. He was a jittery man, always chewing on a toothpick, but today he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Tessa, he muttered, finding her in the walk-in cooler, counting onions. You gotta be careful. Careful of what, Gino? She said, not turning around. I was at O'Malley's last night, down by the docks, just for a drink. He was twisting his apron. There was a guy asking about you. Tessa froze. The net bag of onions suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. What guy? Big guy. Big, slick hair, scar on his chin, looked like he just got out. Gino swallowed hard. He was asking where Tessa Marano was working, showing around an old picture of you, a happy one, from a long time ago. Her blood ran cold. Vincent. He wasn't just in town. He was hunting. What did you say? She whispered, her voice tight. Nothing. I swear. I said I'd never heard of you. But Tess, he was mad. He broke a bottle. Just be careful. That night at 10 o'clock, Dario came in. He took his usual booth. He didn't order. He just sat and watched. Before, it had been an intrusion, a violation. Tonight. Tessa found herself glancing toward the shadows where he sat, her heart hammering for a different reason. The bar was full, loud with Friday night drinkers, but the only person she saw was him. She hated him for what he was. She hated his quiet, arrogant power. But as she delivered a tray of beers, her hands shaking from Gino's warning, she realized something else. She hated that his presence, his simple, silent watching, was the only thing that made the fear of Vincent recede. It was infuriating, and God help her, it was comforting. She worked for an hour, the tension coiling in her belly. He watched her. She felt his eyes on her back as she bent to grab a bottle, on her hands as she made change. He was a predator. Yes, but he was her predator. And the terror of Vincent, the older, more chaotic monster, made her almost grateful for the new one. The cognitive dissonance of it made her want to scream. The night wore on. A pipe under the bar sink chose that moment to burst, spraying foul-smelling water all over her jeans. A table of college kids tried to skip out on their $80 tab. She was soaked. She was tired, and she was stretched as tight as a piano wire. She stormed into the kitchen, grabbed a towel to dry her face, and saw him standing in the doorway. He was just there, as always, a silent shadow. And she snapped. "What?" she hissed, throwing the wet towel into the sink. "What do you want? You've been sitting out there for 3 hours. You haven't ordered. You haven't spoken. What do you want?" Dario didn't move. "The plumbing is bad. Don't you dare," she said, jabbing a finger at him. "Don't you dare come in here and talk about the plumbing like you're just some guy. You paid for this place. You've been watching me, like I'm a bug or a new toy. So what is it? What do you want?" "I'm here," he said, his voice flat. "That's all." "That's not an answer. That's not anything," she was shouting. But she didn't care. She was so full of fear and rage she was vibrating with it. "You're scaring me just as much as he is. Is that the point? You want me to be grateful? You want me to... what? Fall at your feet? Thank you, Mr. Ventresca, for saving me from the monster I know. Just so you can be the monster I don't." He took a step toward her. She took a step back, hitting the prep table. "You're making a scene, Tessa. I don't care. Get out or do something. Just stop. Stop existing in my space." She tried to push past him. He didn't grab her. He just shifted, blocking her path. "Go back to work," he said. "It was an order." "Or what?" she challenged, her eyes flashing. "You'll have me attacked in an alley again? Oh, wait. You already saved me from that. So what's next?" He didn't answer. He just looked at her. "You won't even touch me," she spat, goaded by her own terror. "You just watch. You're a coward. A rich, powerful coward who gets off on watching people squirm." She dared him. She didn't know why. She wanted a reaction. She wanted him to break, to prove he was just a man. His eyes went from cold and still to black ice. In one fluid movement, he had her. He didn't slam her. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his grip a band of steel, and pulled her with him, through the back door and into the alley. He kicked the door shut with his heel. The slam echoed in the narrow brick canyon. He backed her against the wall, not hard, but with an undeniable, terrifying finality. He bracketed her, one hand on the wall by her head, the other still clamped on her arm. He was so close she could feel the heat coming off him, their breath mixed in the cold night air, pluming in front of their faces. "Don't," he said, his voice a low growl she felt in her chest. "Ever call me that again." She was terrified, and she was, to her absolute shame, electrified. Her heart was trying to escape her chest. She could smell the wool of his suit, the cold air, the faint metallic scent of him. "Or what?" she whispered, her voice shaking but her eyes defiant. She was still daring him. "What will you do? Hit me? You're no better than he is." His face, inches from hers, was a mask of controlled fury. His jaw was tight. His eyes raked her face, her mouth. "Hit you," he breathed. "No, I would never." He let go of her arm. His hand, large and warm, came up. She flinched, expecting a blow. His callous thumb brushed her jawline, a touch so light it was almost an insult. It was a caress that felt more threatening than a punch. Her skin burned where he touched. "You don't know what I'd do to you if you let me," he whispered. His thumb traced her lower lip. She stopped breathing. It was a promise and a threat, a vow of destruction and a whisper of desire, all wrapped in one. And then, the tension broke. It snapped like a rubber band. He stepped back, releasing her. The sudden absence of his heat and his presence left her cold, gasping. He straightened his suit jacket. It was perfectly composed, as if he hadn't just had her pinned against a wall. "The pipe is in the crawl space," he said, his voice flat again. "Call a plumber. Send me the bill." He turned and walked back into the bar, leaving her shaking in the alley, her lip tingling where he had touched her. She walked away. She finished her shift. She didn't see him again, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. She replayed the moment, the brush of his thumb, the low-timbered whisper, over and over. She hated him for it, and she had never felt so alive. The next day, she walked home from the bar, her mind not on Vincent but on Dario. The fear of Vincent was a blunt, ugly instrument. The fear of Dario was a razor's edge, sharp and bright and mesmerizing. She climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, fumbling for her keys. She put the key in the top lock. It wasn't locked. She put the key in the middle lock. It, too, was open. Her stomach dropped. She pushed the door. It swung open on a small, dark gap. She always locked all 3. "Vincent," she breathed. She backed away, her hand flying to her pocket for her phone, but she had to know. Was he in there? Was he waiting? She pushed the door open, her hand finding the iron skillet she now kept by the entryway. "Who's there?" Silence. The apartment was still. It smelled of her, of lavender soap and old books. She crept in, her heart hammering. The kitchen was empty. The small living room was empty. She edged toward her bedroom, the skillet held high. She flipped on the light. The room was empty. Nothing was stolen. Her laptop was still on the dresser. The $20 she kept in her jewelry box was still there, but her bed was not empty. On her pillow, where her head should be, was a photograph. It was an old one from 5 years ago, from a company picnic. She was in it, younger, smiling, her arm linked with Vincent's. It was torn in half. Her half was gone. Only Vincent's smiling, smug face remained, staring up at her. He had been here. He had been in her bed, and he had left a piece of himself for her to find. She ran to the bathroom and was violently sick. She called the police. She told them her ex-boyfriend, the one with the restraining order she'd let lapse, had broken into her apartment. The dispatcher sounded bored. "Is he there now, ma'am?" "No, but he was. He left. He left a picture." "So, nothing was stolen?" "No, but he was here. You don't understand. We can send an officer to take a report in the morning. Ma'am, did you have a friend you could stay with?" Tessa hung up, the phone sliding from her trembling hand. A report. In the morning. That night. Dario didn't show up at the bar. Carmela looked at her, worried. "You okay, Kara? You look white." "I'm fine." Tessa lied. She was not fine. She was coming apart. Every time the bar door opened, she jumped. She was a raw, exposed nerve. At 9 o'clock, he came in. He didn't go to the booth. He just stood by the door, his dark overcoat dripping with the night's rain. He looked at her, and the mask she wore, the "I'm fine" mask, the bartender mask, it all just disintegrated. He didn't have to ask. He saw the naked, primal terror in her eyes. He saw the red, raw skin around her mouth from where she'd been sick. He saw that she was broken. Tessa walked out from behind the bar. She didn't care about the customers. She didn't care about Carmela. She walked right up to him, to the most dangerous man in Clearhaven. She stopped a foot in front of him, and her voice was so small it was barely a sound. "Can you help me?" Dario Ventresca looked down at her. His face was unreadable, carved from stone. He didn't speak. He didn't promise her anything. He just raised one hand and made a small, curt gesture toward the door. "Follow." He held the door open for her. She walked out into the rain, leaving her apron, her job, and the last remnants of her old life behind. She got into the black sedan, the one that had haunted her dreams. The ride was silent. The driver, the broad-shouldered man, Luca, drove them through the city, away from the grime of Carmela's and toward the glittering lights of the high-rises. They parked in a private underground garage and took a private elevator straight to the penthouse. The apartment was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a breathtaking, terrible view of the city she'd only ever seen from the bottom. The furniture was all black leather and chrome and glass. It was sleek, empty, and as cold as he was. There were 2 men in dark suits standing in the foyer. They nodded at Dario and ignored her. He walked to a bar and poured 2 glasses of dark red wine, his back to her. "He was in my apartment," she said to his back. Her voice was flat. "I know," he said. He had had a man watching her apartment. The thought was both violating and, in a twisted way, a relief. He turned and handed her a glass. Her hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. He put his hand over hers, steadying it. His skin was warm. "Why?" she whispered, looking up at him. "Why are you doing this, Dario?" He held her gaze. He looked at her, and the coldness in his eyes receded, replaced by that same dark recognition she'd seen in the kitchen. "Because," he said, his voice rough, "you make me feel something I thought I buried." It was the same line as before, but this time, it felt different. It felt like a confession of a shared sickness. She didn't know what to do with that. She was full of terror and wine and a strange, toxic gratitude, so she did the only thing she could. She set her glass down. She took 2 steps, closing the distance between them. She reached up, tangled her hands in the lapels of his expensive suit, and pulled his face down to hers. She kissed him. It was clumsy, desperate. It was all fear and anger and need. It was a plea. For a second, he was rigid, a statue. He was pure, cold shock. Then his hand came up, not to her jaw, but to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her steady. His other arm snaked around her waist, pulling her flush against him, lifting her off her feet as he sat on the cold leather sofa, pulling her into his lap, and he kissed her back. It was not a desperate kiss. It was slow. It was hungry. It was pure, unadulterated control. His mouth moved over hers, claiming her, tasting her, silencing every fear she had with a new, more potent one. It was a kiss that said mine. Her hands left his lapels and gripped his shoulders, holding on like she was drowning. His thumb pressed into the pulse point below her ear, and her head fell back, giving him access to her neck. She felt a tremor run through him, or maybe it was her. He was devouring her, slowly, meticulously, and she was letting him. She was offering herself up. Then, just as she felt herself completely unraveling, he stopped. He pulled back, his forehead resting against hers. His breathing was heavy. His eyes were closed. His hand was still tangled in her hair. His other arm still a band of steel around her waist. "Not yet," he breathed. His voice was raw. "Not until you're sure." "Sure of what?" she panted, her entire body aching. He opened his eyes. They were black, bottomless. "That you know what you're doing. That you're not just running from him, but running to me. And what that means?" He set her gently on her feet, standing up himself. She was unsteady. He was not. "You're safe here," he said, his voice all business again. "My man Luca will be outside the door. Sleep. We'll deal with Vincent in the morning." He turned and walked to the door. He paused, his hand on the handle. "Tessa." She looked up. "Lock this door." And then he was gone, leaving her alone in the vast, silent apartment, high above the city, her lips still burning from his. Tessa woke to the sterile silence of the penthouse, her lips still tingling from a kiss that felt more like a brand. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was spectacular, but it was a cage, a beautiful glass and steel cage, high above the city she knew. She stayed for 3 days. Dario did not return. The broad-shouldered man, Luca, was a constant, silent presence outside her door. He brought her food, not takeout, but elegant meals from restaurants she'd only read about. He brought her clothes, purchased from expensive stores, laid out in neutral-colored bags. She was a doll being kept in a very exclusive box. Her pride didn't just sting, it festered. She had survived Vincent. She had survived poverty. She'd been on her own since she was 16. This protection felt like a gilded suffocation. She wanted her independence, the gritty, exhausting independence of her own life. But the memory of Vincent's torn photograph on her pillow, the feel of his invisible presence in her room, kept her in place. She wanted safety. She wanted to live. She was trapped in the chasm between the two. On the 4th day, she opened the door. Luca was there, as always, standing at ease, his suit jacket unbuttoned just enough to show the holster under his arm. "I'm going to work," Tessa said. It wasn't a request. Luca didn't blink. "Mr. Ventresca advised you to stay." "Mr. Ventresca doesn't own me. I'm going to work. I'm going to Carmela's. Are you going to stop me?" Luca's expression was unreadable. He just stared at her for a long moment. "No, but I'm coming with you. I don't need a babysitter." "With respect, ma'am," Lucas said, his voice flat. "It's not for you. It's for him. If you're not here, you're with me. That's the choice." She hated him. She hated Dario. She hated this entire situation. But she was also reluctantly practical. "Fine," she spat. "But you're not coming in. You can wait in the car. I'll be at the bar. You'll scare the customers." A faint smile, gone as quickly as it came. "That's the point." Tessa returned to Carmela's trattoria, a shadow with a shadow. Luca took a stool at the far end of the bar, ordered a club soda, and sat. He didn't move for 4 hours. He was as quiet as Dario, and just as unnerving. Carmela pulled Tessa into the kitchen, her eyes wide with a new kind of fear. Not the fear of debt collectors, but something older. "Tessa, Kara," she whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. "What have you done?" "I didn't do anything," Tessa snapped, scrubbing a pot with unnecessary force. "He just helped." "Helped?" Carmela's voice was sharp. "That man, Dario Ventresca, he doesn't help. Child, he invests, he owns. You think he just paid my debts out of kindness?" "I don't know what to think," Tessa admitted, her voice small. "You need to be careful," Carmela said, lowering her voice further, even though Luca was a room away. "There is talk. Bad talk. The Costigan brothers are moving on his territory. They say there's a war brewing, the kind of war that doesn't care who gets caught in the middle." Carmela grabbed her arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You are in the middle. He's put you there. This protection. It's a target, Tessa. He's painted a target on this bar. On you." A cold dread settled in Tessa's stomach. Carmela was right. This wasn't protection, this was possession. And what a man like Dario Ventresca possessed. Other men wanted to take... She finished her shift in a daze, Luca's silent presence at the bar a constant, humming reminder of the cage she was in. He drove her back to the penthouse. She ate the expensive dinner alone, staring at the city lights, feeling more trapped than she ever had in her tiny, dead-bolted apartment. She couldn't stay here. She couldn't be this thing he kept on a shelf. The next day, she told Luca she wasn't going back to the penthouse. "I'm staying with Carmela," she said. "She has an apartment upstairs, above the bar. You can guard the door from the street for all I care, but I am not going back to that sterile box." She expected an argument, a call to Dario. Instead, Luca just nodded. "He said you might say that. The apartment has been checked. It's secure. I'll be downstairs." She had moved from a gilded cage to a slightly shabbier one. Carmela's apartment was small and cluttered, smelling of mothballs and tomato sauce. But it was real. It was warm. She slept on the lumpy pull-out sofa, and for the first time in a week, she actually slept. She worked for 2 days. Luca was a permanent fixture at the end of the bar, a silent, tailored gargoyle. The regulars learned to ignore him. The troublemakers didn't even come in. On the 3rd night, Dario came. It was just after closing. Tessa was mopping the floor, the smell of bleach and stale beer filling her nostrils. It was a horrible, comforting routine. Carmela had already gone upstairs. Luca was standing by the front door, waiting to lock it behind her. The door opened. Dario Ventresca stepped in, his dark overcoat damp with the fog. Luca nodded. "Boss." "Luca, wait in the car." It was a dismissal. Luca nodded again and was gone. The door clicked shut, leaving the two of them alone in the dim, empty bar. Tessa's heart was a drum against her ribs. She kept mopping. "We're closed." "I know." He walked toward her, his expensive shoes silent on the tiles she had just cleaned. He stopped a few feet away. He looked tired. There were new, fine lines around his eyes. "You're staying upstairs," he stated. "I am. You're safe there." "So your man tells me." She leaned on the mop, her knuckles white. She was so tired of being a chess piece. "Why are you here, Dario? To check on your investment?" His eyes hardened. "Is that what you think you are? It's what Carmela thinks. It's what Luca thinks. It's what you act like." He took a step closer. "I told you. Something about you won't let me look away." "That's not an answer," she said, her voice shaking. "That's a curse. You've put a target on me, on Carmela, this war. I'm just a reason for it." "You're not a reason," he said, his voice low and intense. "You're the only thing that's not." She didn't understand. She just shook her head, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. I can't do this. I can't be this woman who belongs to the Mafia boss. I'm Tessa. I just want to cook. I just want to be left alone." "Vincent left you alone?" he asked, his voice soft, but sharp as a razor. Her breath hitched. "That's not fair." "It's not, but it's true." He was in front of her now, so close she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "He's been dealt with." "Dealt with? What does that mean? Did you kill him?" The thought was horrifying, and shamefully, a relief. "No," he said, and she was surprised to see a flicker of distaste in his eyes. "He's gone? He won't be back. He won't ever touch you again." She didn't know what gone meant in his world, but she knew it was final. The monster from her past, the one who had haunted her for years, was just erased. By the monster in front of her, she looked at him, at his hard face, his quiet eyes, his perfectly tailored suit, and she felt a wave of such profound, terrible gratitude that it almost brought her to her knees. She dropped the mop. It clattered to the floor. "Come upstairs," she whispered. His eyes searched her face. He was looking for fear, for coercion. He found something else. He found a woman who was drowning and who was, for tonight, choosing her anchor, and he just nodded. She led the way, through the kitchen, up the narrow, rickety stairs to Carmela's apartment. She didn't turn on the main light. The only illumination came from the streetlights outside, casting long, dusty shadows across the cluttered living room. He stood in the middle of the room, a dark monolith in Carmela's cozy, overstuffed world. He looked out of place. He looked dangerous. He shrugged off his overcoat, laying it neatly on the back of a floral armchair. He was just in his suit, white shirt, no tie. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely audible. He turned to her. He didn't answer for a long time. He just looked, with that same intense gaze that stripped her bare. "I had a wife," he said, his voice quiet. "She's been gone. A long time, since she died. I have felt nothing. I built my world on it, on feeling nothing. It's safer. It's clean." He took a step toward her. "And then I see you. You're a mess. You're terrified, and you're angry, and you're fighting with everything you have. You're not clean. You're not safe. You feel everything, and you make me feel." I don't know what to do with that," she breathed. "Neither do I." He was in front of her. He didn't touch her. He was waiting. Tessa looked at this man who had, in the span of a week, upended her entire existence. He had saved her, and he had endangered her. He had solved her biggest problem, and he had become her new one. She reached out, her hand trembling, and laid it on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel the steady, slow thump beneath her palm. He was real. "You're a bad man, Dario Ventresca," she whispered. "Yes," he said. No pretense, no denial. "You scare me." "I know." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "But he scared me more." She rose on her toes and kissed him. It was not like the first kiss. It was not desperate or angry. This was slow. This was cautious. It was a question. He didn't pull her into his lap. He didn't devour her. His hands came up to rest, so gently, on her waist. He kissed her back, his mouth moving with a slow, aching tenderness that was more disarming than his passion. She pulled back, breathless. "This is crazy." "Yes." He didn't push. He just waited. She was the one who leaned in again, this time. Her hand slid up his chest, over his shoulders, to tangle in his hair. She pulled his mouth back to hers, and this time, there was more hunger. It was her hunger. It was the need to feel something other than fear. He made a low sound in his throat, and his hands tightened on her waist, pulling her flush against him. The hard planes of his body met her soft curves, and a jolt of pure, white-hot electricity shot through her. He broke the kiss, his forehead resting against hers. His breath was ragged. "Tessa, if we do this, there's no—" "You have to be sure. I'm sure of nothing," she whispered, her voice raw. "Except this. Except, I want to feel safe. And God help me. You're the only thing that's ever made me feel wanted and safe at the same time." That broke his control. His mouth was on hers again, but this time it was his hunger. He kissed her like he was starving, a deep, bruising kiss that stole her breath. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, and she wrapped her legs around his waist, clinging to him. He carried her the 2 steps to the lumpy pull-out sofa and fell onto it with her, never breaking the kiss. He was on top of her, his weight a comforting, solid presence. His hands were in her hair, at her waist, on her back, tracing her, learning her. He pulled back, his eyes black with a desire that was so potent it was almost frightening. He looked lost. "You are so beautiful," he breathed, his voice thick. He started to undress her, but it wasn't a fumbling, hurried act. He did it with a reverence, an agonizing slowness. He unbuttoned her worn flannel shirt, his fingers brushing her skin, leaving trails of fire. He kissed every inch of skin he revealed, her collarbone, the hollow of her throat, the swell of her breast. He treated her like she was fragile, like she was precious. No one had ever touched her like that. Vincent's touches were hard and selfish. Dario's touch was a prayer. She was trembling, not from fear, but from a new, terrifying vulnerability. Her hands fumbled with the buttons of his shirt, and he helped her, shrugging out of it. His chest was hard, and she saw them, faint. White lines against his skin, old scars. She traced one, a long-forgotten knife wound, and he flinched, but not in pain. He flinched in surprise, as if he'd forgotten it was there. She held on to him, her hands gripping his scarred, powerful shoulders, holding on as if she was drowning in the center of an ocean. He undressed her. He undressed himself. And in the dim, dusty light of Carmela's apartment, he made her feel new. He was slow. He was tender. He whispered her name like it was a holy word. He watched her, his eyes never leaving hers, as he finally made them one. She didn't cry out. She just shattered. It was not the fireworks of cheap romance novels. It was the slow, tectonic shifting of her entire world. It was quiet, and it was profound. And when he followed her, his body tensing, a low, guttural groan rumbling in his chest, she held him. She held him as if he was the one who was broken, and she was the one putting him back together. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, the room silent. His head was on her chest, his arm thrown possessively over her waist. She was stroking his hair, her own admission still hanging in the air. "I've never," she whispered, her voice thick, "ever felt like that." He kissed her shoulder. Me neither. The peace lasted for 2 days. 2 days where she worked, and he would appear at closing, and they would go upstairs, and in the dark, they would learn each other, body and soul. Then, the world intruded. Tessa was wiping down the bar when the television in the corner, usually ignored, blared a special report. A local news anchor, her face grim, was standing in front of a roped-off street. Police are investigating a grisly discovery this morning. The body of Patrick Costigan, youngest brother of the notorious Costigan crime family, was found in his vehicle at the city docks. Police suspect a professional hit. Sources say this may be a brutal escalation in an ongoing, violent turf war. Tessa's hand, holding a glass, froze. The glass slipped from her fingers and shattered in the sink. Costigan. The name Carmela had said. A brewing gang war. She felt sick. Dario had been with her last night. All night. He couldn't have. But his world, his men, she was shaking. She was being dragged into something dark, something she couldn't fight. This wasn't about her and Vincent anymore. This was blood. That night, when Dario came, she was waiting, not with a kiss, but with a wall. "Did you do it?" she asked, her arms crossed, standing in the middle of the bar. Luca had already left. "Do what?" he asked, unbuttoning his coat. The man. On the news? Patrick Costigan, did one of your men?" He just looked at her. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it. "Oh my God," she whispered, backing away. "Oh my God, Dario, this is real. This is my world. Tessa, I've never lied to you about it. I know, but I can't," she said, her voice breaking. "I can't be this. I can't sleep with a man who does that." She was crying, hot, angry tears. "I just got out. I just got my life back. I can't be dragged into this." She tried to push him away, to tell him to leave, to tell him it was over. "I can't handle your world. Dario, I'm not strong enough." He caught her hands. He held her face, his grip firm, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were blazing. "You are the strongest person I have ever met," he said, his voice a low, fierce growl. "You are not disposable. Not to me. Do you understand me?" He was claiming her, not just as a lover, but as a part of him. He was telling her she was his, and he would not let her go. Before she could answer, a sound from outside made them both freeze, a car peeling out, a shout, and then the front window of Carmela's trattoria exploded. A bottle, wrapped in a burning rag, sailed through the air and crashed onto the floor, erupting in a whoosh of flame, a Molotov cocktail. "Tessa!" Dario roared, shoving her behind the bar. Another bottle crashed, this one hitting the shelf of liquor. The wall went up in a sheet of blue flame. "Carmela!" Tessa screamed, scrambling for the kitchen. "Dario, Carmela's upstairs." He was already moving, grabbing the fire extinguisher from the wall. "Go! Get her! Use the back stairs! Go!" Tessa ran, the heat scorching her back, the smell of gasoline and burning whiskey filling her lungs. She burst through the kitchen door and up the rickety stairs, shouting, "Carmela! Fire! Carmela, wake up!" She slammed the apartment door open. Carmela was standing there, in her nightgown, rubbing her eyes. "What is all this?" "We have to go! Now!" Tessa grabbed the older woman, pulling her toward the back fire escape, the one that led to the alley. They scrambled down the metal steps, Carmela sobbing, Tessa's heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. They hit the alley just as the first fire truck wailed in the distance. Dario was there. He was covered in soot, his hands raw. He had put out the worst of it, but the bar was gone. Smoke and steam poured from the broken windows. He ran to her, his eyes wild, checking her for injuries. "Are you all right? Are you hurt?" "We're fine," she panted, clinging to Carmela. "We're fine." Dario Ventresca turned and stared into the fire, into the ruins of the little bar. His face, illuminated by the flashing red lights of the approaching trucks, was a mask of pure, cold fury. He looked like a god of vengeance. He turned back to her, and his voice was terrifyingly calm. "I gave them a warning," he said, his gaze locked on hers, the promise in his eyes a dark, terrible thing. "They want a war now." The ashes of Carmela's trattoria were still warm when Dario relocated her. The new cage was not a cage of glass and steel in the sky, but one of brick and old-world stone, 20 miles outside Clearhaven. The estate was hidden, surrounded by a high, ancient wall and acres of dense, dark forest. It was beautiful, with sculpted gardens, a gravel drive that crunched under the tires, and a house that looked like it had been transported from a forgotten corner of Italy. It was also a fortress. Men with dark suits and darker eyes patrolled the perimeter. Every window was reinforced. Every door had a keypad. And Luca, her constant shadow, was no longer her only guard. There were 4, rotating in shifts. Tessa hated it. She resented the isolation, the quiet, the feeling of being a prize locked in a tower. But she understood the need. The fire at Carmela's, the shattered glass and the smell of gasoline had been a clear, brutal message. The Costigans were not just fighting Dario, they were hunting her. Dario stayed with her, but he was not the man from Carmela's apartment. The tenderness they had shared was buried under a mountain of responsibility. He was a king, and his kingdom was at war. He spent his days in the estate's study, a room paneled in dark mahogany, taking calls, his voice a low, cold monotone. Men came and went, capos, soldiers, men with hard faces and respectful nods. Tessa watched from the doorway. She heard snippets. Supply lines, the docks. He needs to be handled. She was learning his world. It was a world of cold, hard decisions, of brutal logic. It was a hierarchy built on fear and loyalty in equal measure. But as she watched him, she saw something that shocked her more than the violence. He took no pleasure in it. He would end a call that clearly sentenced a man to some dark fate, and his face would be gray. He would rub the bridge of his nose, his eyes closed, the weight of his world pressing down on him. She saw a man trapped in a life he was born into, a life he mastered, but clearly, in the quiet moments, despised. One rainy afternoon, she found herself alone in the study. He had been called away to a meeting in the city, the first time he'd left her at the estate. She was restless, tracing the spines of leather-bound books she had no intention of reading. On his desk, pushed to the side, was a simple silver frame. It was not a picture of Dario. It was a woman. She was beautiful, with dark, laughing eyes and hair that curled in the wind. She was on a boat, the sun on her face, her smile wide and unguarded. She was everything this house was not. She was free. She was beautiful. Tessa spun around. Dario was standing in the doorway, his overcoat still on, dripping rainwater onto the priceless Persian rug. He hadn't been gone an hour. I'm sorry, I was just... It's all right, he said, his voice flat. He walked to the desk, his eyes on the photograph. He looked at it with a profound, aching sadness that made Tessa's chest tighten. Who was she? Tessa asked, though she already knew. My wife, he said. Anna. He picked up the frame, and his thumb tracing the silver edge. She was like you, in some ways. She didn't see the world I lived in. She only saw me. She thought I could be something else. What happened to her? Tessa whispered. Dario put the frame down, his back to her. He looked out the window, at the rain lashing against the glass. It was 7 years ago, he said, his voice a dead thing. We were going to dinner. We had an argument. Something stupid. I told her to take her own car, that I would meet her there. He paused, and the silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. It was a car bombing, he said. The Costigans, their father, not the brothers. They'd been trying to get at me for months, but they were sloppy. Or maybe they were smart. They knew I drove a different car every day. They knew my routines. He turned to face her. His eyes were not just cold, they were hollow. They were the eyes of a man who had died and been forced to keep walking. It was meant for me, Tessa. The bomb was under my seat. But Anna always liked to drive my car. She said it was the only time she felt like she had any power in this world. She got in the driver's side. She turned the key. Tessa brought a hand to her mouth, a small, horrified sound escaping her. I was standing on the porch. He whispered. I watched. The confession hung between them, a ghost that filled the room. And in that moment, Tessa's simmering resentment, her fear, her confusion, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of terrible understanding. And me, she said, her voice shaking, what am I? He looked at her, confused. What do you mean? Am I her? Am I the replacement? The words were out before she could stop them, bitter and acidic. Is that what this is? You found another woman in a bad situation, another woman who feels things, and you thought you'd... What? Try again? Get it right this time. Tessa, he said, his voice a low warning. Don't what? She cried. The injustice of it, the pain of it, overflowing. Don't see what's right in front of me? You don't want me. You want her. You want a do-over. You're not protecting me, Dario. You're hoarding me. I'm just here to fill the void. That's not true, he said, but there was no conviction in it. He was too raw, too exposed. Isn't it? She spat, her own pain making her cruel. You make me feel something I thought I buried. That's what you said. You meant her. You meant the guilt. His face, which had been open and wounded, slammed shut. The cold, controlled boss was back, his eyes like chips of ice. You don't know what you're talking about. I know I'm sleeping in a dead woman's house. He flinched, as if she had physically struck him. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her with a sudden, cold detachment that was worse than his anger. He said nothing. He just turned, grabbed his still damp overcoat, and walked out of the study. He walked out of the house. A minute later, she heard the sound of his car, the gravel crunching, fading into the rain. He had left her. She was alone in the fortress, with only the ghost of Anna for company. Meanwhile, in a dark, smoky bar on the wrong side of town, a different kind of ghost was making a deal. Vincent, his face a mask of petty rage and desperation, sat across from two men, the Costigan brothers. I'm telling ya, Vincent slurred, his bravado fueled by the expensive whiskey they'd given him. He's got her. He's obsessed with her, and he's got her stashed upstate, the old Moretti estate. He thinks it's a fortress, but I know her. I know how to get to her. And what do you get out of this, rat? The older Costigan brother asked. I want her, Vincent snarled. He took her from me, and I want the money he owes me for the info. The brothers looked at each other and smiled. You'll get what you deserve. 2 nights passed. Dario did not return. Tessa was a wreck. She paced the house, her argument with him playing over and over in her head. She had been cruel. She had been right. She didn't know what she was. Luca was a constant presence. He was worried, she could tell. He's busy, ma'am, he'd said. The Costigan thing, it's coming to a head. He's not answering my calls. Luca just looked at his feet. He'll be back. But he wasn't. On the 3rd night, Dario was still gone. A business trip, Luca had said, his voice tight. A meeting with the 5 families in New York. He was trying to get them to sanction his war against the Costigans. Tessa was in the kitchen, trying to cook. It was the only thing that calmed her. She was making a simple aglio e olio, the smell of garlic and olive oil filling the vast, cold room. That's when the lights went out. The whole house plunged into darkness. The hum of the refrigerator died. The only sound was the wind outside. Luca, she called, her voice trembling. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a dim, red glow. Luca was already in the doorway, his gun in his hand. They cut the power, he said, his voice a deadly calm. They're on the grounds. Tessa's blood turned to ice. The Costigans, or worse, Luca said. He grabbed her arm. We have to go. Now. Alarms started to blare, a shrill, piercing sound. He dragged her through the house, toward the study. There's a panic room, behind the bookshelf. They heard glass shatter, shouts, the sound of gunfire. Not just pistols, automatic weapons. Go, go, go! Luca shoved her into the study. He was at the door, firing back into the hall. Get in! She fumbled with the book he'd told her to pull. A section of the wall swung open, revealing a dark, steel-lined closet. She scrambled in. Luca, she screamed. Come on, get in, lock it. He was still firing. She was about to pull the heavy door shut when a man burst into the room. He was not one of Dario's. He was gaunt, with wild eyes. Vincent, Tessa, he shrieked, a mad, triumphant smile on his face. Told you I'd find you. Baby. Luca turned, but he was too late. Vincent lunged, grabbing Tessa, pulling her out of the panic room, a knife at her throat. Drop it, Suit, drop it or I cut her. Luca's face was a mask of fury. He let his gun clatter to the floor. Good boy, Vincent spat. He was dragging Tessa, his arm like a vice around her, the knife biting into her skin. Now, we're gonna... He never finished. Luca, disarmed but not defeated, moved. He was a blur. He kicked the gun on the floor, sending it spinning, and slammed his elbow into Vincent's temple. Vincent staggered, his grip on Tessa loosening. Tessa fell, scrambling away. 2 more men, Costigan soldiers, burst in. Luca met them. It was a brutal, desperate fight. Tessa crawled, trying to get back to the panic room. One of the soldiers saw her. He grabbed her by the arm, his fingers digging in, and hauled her to her feet, using her as a shield. "Stop!" he yelled at Luca. "Luca!" His face, bloody, froze. Tessa reacted. She bit the man's hand, hard. He roared and backhanded her, sending her crashing into Dario's desk, but he'd let go. Luca used the opening. He was on the man, a flurry of efficient, deadly blows. "The room, Tessa, now!" he roared. She scrambled in, her entire body shaking. She slammed the heavy steel door and threw the deadbolt. She was alone, in the dark, the sounds of the fight and gunfire, screams, thuds were muffled, and then, one by one, they stopped. She waited. For an hour. For a lifetime. Finally, she heard a knock, a sequence. Tap, tap, tap. Pause. Tap, tap. "Luca?" she whispered. "It's me. Ma'am, they're gone. It's clear." She opened the door. The study was destroyed. Luca was slumped against the wall, bleeding from a cut on his head, but alive. The other men were not. Vincent was gone. He ran. Luca panted. The others. They retreated. They heard the sirens. He had saved her. She had the bruises on her arm, a cut on her cheek where she hit the desk, but she was alive. Dario arrived 30 minutes later. He came in a helicopter, landing on the front lawn in a whirlwind of noise and light. He burst into the house, his face pale, his eyes frantic. "Tessa, where is she?" He found her in the kitchen, wrapped in a blanket, Luca getting stitched up by another of Dario's men. "Dario," she breathed. She was so relieved to see him she could have wept. He crossed the room in 2 strides, his eyes raking over her. He saw the cut on her cheek, he saw the blood, and then he saw her arm. She had pushed up the sleeve of her shirt. The dark, ugly, finger-shaped bruises were already blooming on her pale skin, where the Costigan soldier had grabbed her. Dario stopped. He just stopped breathing. His face, which had been frantic with fear and relief, went utterly, terrifyingly blank. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. He had snapped. "Who?" he said. His voice so quiet it was more frightening than any shout. "Boss," Luca started. "It was Vincent. He was with them." Dario's eyes, dead and hollow, met Luca's. "Where's Boss? She's safe. That's what matters. Where is he?" Luca looked at Tessa, his eyes full of apology. He knew. He's been running a game out of the old Red Hook warehouse. He's probably there." Dario turned and walked out of the kitchen. "Dario!" Tessa screamed, running after him. "Dario, stop!" He was already at the front door, grabbing a set of keys from a bowl. "Don't," she pleaded, grabbing his arm. "Don't. It's over. I'm safe. Look at me." He looked at her, but he didn't see her. He saw the bruises. "He touched you," he whispered. "He touched you." He gently, almost reverently, removed her hand from his arm and walked out into the night. "Luca." Tessa turned, frantic. "Take me. We have to. I have to stop him." Luca, his head bandaged, just nodded. "He'll listen to you, or he won't listen to anyone." They found the warehouse. Dario's black sedan was parked outside, the engine ticking. They went in through a side door. The warehouse was vast and empty, save for the single pool of light in the center. Dario was there, and so was Vincent. Vincent was ruined. He was on his knees, his face a bloody, unrecognizable mess. His nose was clearly, grotesquely broken. He was sobbing, begging. Dario stood over him, his suit jacket gone, his white shirt sleeves rolled up. He was just watching him. He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched and bloody. "Dario!" Tessa screamed. He froze. He turned, and the man who looked at her was not the man she knew. His eyes were black, feral. He was a monster. "Tessa," he panted. "Go, get out of here." "No," she said, walking toward him, her legs shaking. "Stop, please. It's done. He's finished. Let it go." "He put his hands on you." Dario growled, his gaze snapping back to Vincent. He raised his fist. "And you'll kill him for it," she cried, grabbing his arm. His arm was like iron. You'll cross that line for me? Don't, please, Dario. Don't become a murderer for me." He looked at her, his chest heaving. He looked at the bloody, broken man on the floor. He looked at his own bloody hands, and the madness in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a profound, soul-deep weariness. He let his arm drop. He let Vincent, who had already passed out from pain and fear, slump to the floor. He was shaking. He turned to Tessa, his face a mask of agony. "You," he whispered, his voice raw. "You are the only line I wouldn't cross." He meant killing Vincent, but he also meant everything. He wouldn't let his vengeance destroy the one good thing he had. He wouldn't become the monster in front of her. He pulled her into his arms, his bloody hands making a mess of her shirt, and he buried his face in her hair. "He touched you." He just kept whispering, like a prayer. "He touched you." "I'm okay," she sobbed, clinging to him. "I'm okay." "You're here." "I'm okay." That night, back at the penthouse, the estate was compromised. They didn't talk. The argument, the ghost of Anna, it all felt small, insignificant. They stood in the enormous marble shower, the hot water washing away the blood and the soot and the fear. They were both shaking, wrecked from the adrenaline. Tessa's hands, trembling, found the old scars on his chest. She traced them, her fingers learning the map of his pain, mixing the past with the present. He was not a god. He was not a monster. He was just a man. A man who had been through a war, and who was still fighting. He leaned his forehead against hers, the water streaming between them. His mouth, so often hard and cold, was soft. He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion, not like before. It was a kiss of desperation, of gratitude, of two broken, shipwrecked people clinging to the same piece of driftwood. His mouth moved from her lips, down her jaw to her collarbone. The spot where Vincent had threatened her, where the soldier had bruised her. He kissed the bruises, his touch reverent. "You make me want to be clean," he whispered, his voice thick, his mouth moving against her skin. It was a confession. It was a prayer. And she knew, as she held his head in her hands, that it was a curse they would both have to bear. The whisper of clean hung between them, a desperate, impossible promise. The attack on the estate had changed everything. Dario was no longer a man divided. He was a man with a singular purpose: end the war, keep her safe. The near miss with Vincent had shattered his cold-blooded composure. The sight of bruises on her skin had forged his rage into a focused, lethal point. He began by setting up a meeting, not with his capos, but with what remained of the Costigan leadership. It was a risk, a blatant offer of peace from a man who had never before offered anything but terms of surrender. "You're going to meet them?" Tessa had been horrified, watching him on the phone, his voice a low, calm instrument of negotiation. He was in the penthouse study, a place that now felt more like a command center than a home. "It's the only way," he said, hanging up. "They're bleeding. They're stupid, but they're not suicidal. They'll listen to reason. They'll listen to a truce. Or they'll put a bullet in you, Dario. Then they'll put a bullet in me," he said, his voice flat, but his eyes, as they met hers, held a new, fragile light. "But I'm tired of the noise. Tessa, I'm tired of this." While he planned for peace, Tessa tried to find some semblance of a normal life. It was impossible. She was a prisoner of his protection, and now a prisoner of the public's imagination. The fire at Carmela's, followed by the shootout at the estate, had not gone unnoticed. The press, smelling blood and scandal, had descended. There were no pictures of her, not yet, but the whispers had become headlines. She saw them on the television in the penthouse. On the cover of the tabloids Luca brought in with the groceries, mob boss's mystery woman at center of bloody turf war. From dive bar to penthouse, Dario Ventresca's new mistress. Mistress, the word was a slap. It was cheap. It was dirty. It reduced her pain, her fear, the complicated, terrifying, and tender feelings she had for Dario, into something sordid. She was humiliated, a ghost in a glass tower, her name dragged through the mud of a world she never asked for. "Don't read it," Dario said, finding her one morning staring at a paper, her face pale. "They're calling me a mistress." she whispered, her voice thick with shame. "They make it sound like I'm a prostitute. Like I wanted this. They don't know about Vincent. They don't know what you did." "I know," he said, his voice a low growl. He took the paper from her, crumpled it in his fist, and threw it in the trash. "And you know, nothing else matters. It matters to me. I'm ashamed." "No," he said, tilting her chin up. "You don't get to be ashamed. You're a survivor. Let them talk. They're just noise." But he knew it wasn't enough. A few nights later, he walked into the living room and dropped a dark velvet dress onto the sofa. It was the color of a midnight sky. "What's this?" "We're going out," he said. "Out. Out where?" "To another safe house. To the Clearhaven Founders Ball, at the museum. It's a civic duty." Tessa laughed, a bitter, harsh sound. "A charity gala. You're a mob boss, and I'm your mistress. They'll eat us alive." "Let them try," he said, his eyes hard. "Put it on. We leave at 8. She felt like a lamb to the slaughter. The dress, of course, fit her as if it had been sewn on her. It was simple, elegant, and impossibly expensive. She was beautiful, and she had never felt more like an imposter. They walked into the museum's grand hall, and the entire glittering, old-money crowd of Clearhaven fell silent. The whispers were a physical wind, brushing past her. "That's him. Ventresca." "Is that her?" Dario was magnificent, in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. He was not a shadow. He was a king. He held her hand, his grip warm and firm, and led her through the sea of staring, judgmental faces as if he owned every one of them. And, Tessa realized, in a way, he did. He didn't get her a drink. He didn't mingle. He led her straight to the dance floor as the orchestra began a slow, sweeping waltz. "Dario, no," she hissed, her face burning. "Everyone is staring." "Good," he said. He pulled her into his arms, one hand on her back, the other clasping hers. He was a surprisingly good dancer. She was learning, good at everything he did. He held her close, his face impassive, his eyes locked on hers. The crowd, the whispers, the city, it all melted away. There was only the music and the solid, warm presence of the man holding her. "They're all looking," she whispered, her head resting on his shoulder. "Let them all look," he whispered back, his mouth at her ear, his breath warm on her skin. "You're mine." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a possessive claim. It was a statement of fact. It was a shield. He was telling the entire world, "She is with me. She is protected. She is not a mistress. She is mine." And in that moment, the gala changed nothing, and it changed everything. The whispers didn't stop, but they changed their tone. And Tessa, she changed. She was no longer ashamed. She was claimed. She found Carmela, who Dario had set up in a safe, comfortable apartment across town. He burned my bar," Carmela said, her eyes still sad. "And he'll rebuild it," Tessa said, her voice full of a new, hard-won authority. She unrolled a set of blueprints on Carmela's small kitchen table, but not a trattoria, not a dive bar, a bistro, my bistro. She poured her life into it. Dario's money, funneled through an anonymous city revitalization fund, was limitless. Tessa didn't care. He owed them. He owed her. She spent her days on a construction site, covered in sawdust and plaster, arguing with contractors, choosing paint colors, designing a kitchen to her exact, professional specifications. She wrote menus. She tested sauces in the penthouse kitchen. She was a chef again. She was finding her purpose. Not in surviving, but in building. Dario watched her, a quiet, almost awestruck look in his eyes. He saw the woman he'd first seen in the bar, the one with fire and fight, but now she was content. She was alive. One afternoon, he found her at the construction site, arguing with a plumber. He says the gas line can't support a 6-burner stove. I'm telling him he's an idiot. He is, Dario said, and the plumber, seeing who had spoken, suddenly found a way to make it work. Come on, Dario said, taking her hand. Not in the sedan. In my car. There's somewhere I want to show you." He drove her. Not in one of his black armored sedans, but in a simple dark blue pickup truck she had never seen. He drove for an hour, out of the city, past the manicured lawns of the suburbs, to a part of town she didn't know existed. The houses were small, tightly packed, the fences in disrepair. It was a neighborhood of hard-working people who were just getting by. He parked in front of a small, 2-story house, its white paint peeling, its porch slightly sagging. "What is this?" she asked. "This," he said, killing the engine, "is where I grew up." She followed him up the walk. He had a key. The house was empty, the air thick with dust and the smell of old wood. The furniture was gone, but the ghosts were not. "My old man bought this house when he came over. He was a mason, worked with his hands. Hard man," Dario said, his voice quiet, distant. "He touched the banister. He ruled this house with his fist." He led her into the small kitchen. "My mother, she just endured. She was quiet. She was terrified. I spent my whole life promising myself I would never be him, that I would never, ever raise my hand to a woman." He looked at Tessa, and she saw the echo of the night he'd nearly killed Vincent. "And you," she whispered, "are not him." "I was 16 when my father died," he said, moving to the living room, staring out the window at the tiny, overgrown backyard. "My uncle, his brother, he took me in. He was in the life. He said I was smart, that I had a good head for numbers, that I was a natural leader." He turned to her, his face a mask of old, deep pain. "I never wanted it. Tessa, I wanted to be an architect. I wanted to build things, like my old man. But the life, it doesn't let you go. It pulls you in, and it turned out I was very, very good at it." He was confessing. Not his sins, but his prison. He was trapped in the same way she had been, just in a much bigger, more expensive cage. Their bond, forged in fear and passion, now deepened into something else. Something quiet, something like understanding. They sat on the dusty, sagging porch as the sun began to set, casting long, orange shadows. He took her hand. It was covered in drywall dust. His was clean. "The meeting is tomorrow," he said, "with the Costigans. If it goes well, I'm setting things in motion. My exit." She looked at him, her heart stopping. "An exit? From all of it?" "I have a plan." He said, "It will be difficult. It will take time. But yes, from all of it, I'm tired. I want to build things again." He looked at her, and all the power, all the authority, all the boss was gone. He was just a man, sitting on a porch, his eyes full of a terrifying, fragile hope. "If I walk away from it all," he asked, his voice rough, "if I'm not him, if I'm just Dario, the one who wanted to be an architect, would you still want me?" She looked at this man who had saved her, endangered her, claimed her, and now was baring his soul to her. She brought his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles. "Only then?" she whispered. The next day was agony. He left at noon. "It's at a neutral site," he'd said. "A warehouse. Luca and 3 others. That's it. It's a truce. It will be fine." But his kiss, as he left, was not fine. It was desperate. Tessa was at the bistro. She couldn't sit still. She was scrubbing the new stainless steel prep tables, her anxiety a living thing in her gut. Luca wasn't with her. He was with Dario, a new, young soldier named Marco. His face pale with the responsibility, stood by the door, trying to be invisible. Dario was supposed to call her by 3, at 4. Her phone was silent. At 5, she started to pace. At 6, she was calling his phone. It went straight to voicemail. "Marco," she said, her voice sharp. Call someone. Call his office." Marco was already on his earpiece, his face getting paler. "Sir, I can't reach Luca, or the boss. Their comms are dark." Tessa's blood turned to ice. She ran to the television above the empty bar. The news was on, a local channel. Breaking news from the Red Hook warehouse district. Sources report a massive shootout. Multiple shots fired. Police are on the scene, but are confirming it appears to be a gang-related incident. "No," she breathed. "No, no, no." She waited. All night. She was back in the penthouse, Marco standing helplessly by the door. She sat on the sofa, in the dark, staring at the floor-to-ceiling windows, at the city lights that mocked her. He was dead. He had to be. He had gone in for peace, and they had ambushed him. It was a trap. Just like she'd said. She had finally found this broken, complicated, beautiful man. And he was gone. She was alone again. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in shades of gray and sick, pale pink. She heard a key in the door. She shot to her feet, her heart in her throat. The door opened. It was Luca. He was holding a pillar of red. He was half carrying Dario, whose left side was soaked, a dark, black-red stain. From his ribs to his knee, Dario was covered in blood. His suit was shredded. His face was a mask of soot and gore, a deep cut on his forehead. But he was alive. His eyes, slits of pain, found hers. Luca, himself bleeding from a nasty wound on his arm, grunted. It was a trap. Costigans had cops. Everyone. We lost 2 men, but we got out. Tessa didn't hear him. She was moving. She wasn't running. She was just there. She crashed into him. Dario, bloody and broken, stumbled, but he caught her. His good arm wrapped around her, pulling her so tight she couldn't breathe. "Tessa," he breathed, his face burying in her hair. It was a prayer. It was an apology. It was everything. "You're alive," she sobbed, her hands frantic, checking his wounds, touching his face, his chest. "Oh my God, you're alive. It's just a graze," he panted as she pulled back to look at the bloody mess on his side. The bullet, it went through Luca. "I'm fine, boss," Luca said, already on the phone, calling Dario's private doctor. Tessa helped him to the sofa. She ripped his shirt open, saw the angry, torn flesh on his side. It was bad, but it wasn't a gut shot. He would live. That night, after the doctor had come and gone, after Luca had been stitched and had posted a guard, they were alone. The war was not over. It was, she suspected, just beginning. But they were alive. They didn't talk. They didn't make love. She led him to the bedroom and they just lay down. She didn't bother to change. He was too weak. They just lay on top of the covers, fully clothed, pressed together. She laid her head on his chest, her hand splayed over his heart, feeling its steady, strong beat. His arms were around her, his grip possessive. Even in his exhaustion, there were no barriers, there was no boss, no mistress, no chef, no victim. There were just 2 broken, tired, terrified people, clinging to each other in the dark, holding on to a fragile, desperate, and unspoken hope. The trap in the warehouse, the graze of a bullet, the blood and the terror. It was not an end. It was a catalyst. As Dario's side healed, a new, cold resolve settled over him. The line he had refused to cross for vengeance, he would now cross for freedom. He had told Tessa he wanted to be clean. He was about to set his entire world on fire to get there. It began 2 weeks later, in the library of the penthouse. Dario, his ribs taped but his spine straight, had called a meeting, his capos. The 4 most powerful men under him, men who had sworn blood oaths to his family, sat at his mahogany table. They were nervous. They had heard about the shootout. They had heard about her. "It's over," Dario said. No preamble, no softness. The men looked at each other. A heavy, gold-ringed hand, belonging to a man named Sal, gestured. "Boss, what's over? The war? We'll hit him back. We'll finish the Costi." "No," Dario cut him off. "The war is over. My leadership is over." The silence was absolute. It was a vacuum, a void. "I am dissolving my position," Dario continued, his voice flat, emotionless. He was an executive dissolving a company. "I am retiring, as of tonight. My authority, my interests, they pass." He looked at Luca, who stood by the door, his face a mask of stone. This was the only part he hadn't told Tessa. "Luca," he said. The men turned. Luca, his most trusted soldier, his driver, his shadow. He is young, but he is loyal. And he is tired of the blood. He will be loyal to peace. He will be loyal to the new terms. It was a coup, a resignation, an abdication, all in one. He was passing his kingdom, not to the strongest, but to the most stable. He was ending the Ventresca dynasty. There was shouting, protests of loyalty, accusations of weakness. Dario just stood. "It is done," he said. And it was. He was no longer their boss. He was just a man in a room. He had burned his crown. His next meeting was not in a penthouse, but in the sterile, high-priced office of a lawyer who specialized in disappearances, legal ones. "The terms are simple," Dario said to the man, who was a former U.S. attorney. "Mr. Ventresca," the lawyer said, "the immunity you're asking for, it's astronomical. And the intel I'm offering," Dario countered, "is the entire structure of the Clearhaven underworld, the Costigans, the suppliers, the routes, every dirty cop." He pushed a single, encrypted hard drive across the desk. "I'm giving you my entire world on one condition. The money, your assets." "You can have the money," Dario said, a statement so shocking the lawyer almost dropped his pen. "Keep it, seize it, donate it. I've put one small fund aside. Legally, the rest. It's poison. I want out, but my condition is not negotiable." "Which is?" Dario leaned forward, his eyes. The only part of him that was still the boss, burning with a cold. Absolute fire. Tessa Morano, her name. It is never spoken. It never appears in a file. It is never part of an investigation. She is a civilian. She was a victim of Vincent Torvelli, who was an associate of the Costigans. She was in my protection. That's the story. That's the only story. If her name is whispered, if a single reporter gets a leak about a Mafia mistress, the deal is off, and that hard drive, it has a failsafe. The lawyer, for the first time, looked afraid. She's clean, untouchable. I understand. She is the only thing," Dario said. "That is..." While Dario was dismantling his prison, Tessa was visiting hers. The Clearhaven County Jail was a gray, concrete box that smelled of bleach and regret. Tessa sat at the partition, the plastic glass between them, and waited. He was led in, not the cowering, broken man from the warehouse, but the sullen, angry Vincent she remembered. His nose was crooked, his face a mess of yellowing bruises, but the hatred in his eyes was familiar. "You," he spat, grabbing the phone receiver. "You did this to me. You and you're rich." "I didn't do anything, Vincent," Tessa said. Her voice was calm. It was steady. She was surprised by it. There was no shaking, no fear, just pity. "You did this. You always did this. You blamed everyone else. He's gonna get tired of you," Vincent snarled, his face pressing against the glass. And I'm gonna be waitin'. When I get out..." "When you get out?" Tessa almost laughed. The charges against him, from the attack on the estate, from his association with the Costigans, from Dario's anonymous tip about his past, he was going away for a very long time. "You're not waiting for anything, Vin, you're just gone. You bitch. I will..." Tessa stood up. She looked at him, at this small, pathetic, furious man who had controlled her life for so long. He was just a memory, a bad story. "You have no power over me anymore. Vincent," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You can't hurt me. You can't even scare me." She placed her receiver gently back on the hook, cutting off his muffled, furious scream. She reclaimed her past, and she walked out of the jail, into the sunlight. And for the first time since she was 16 years old, she was completely and totally free. She returned to the penthouse. It was empty. The expensive art was gone. The heavy, mahogany furniture was shrouded in white sheets. It was a ghost of a room. Dario was standing by the window, in simple slacks and a gray sweater. He was looking out at the city. His city, no longer his. He was holding a single small suitcase. He turned as she entered. He looked younger. He looked like the man who had wanted to be an architect. She walked to him. She didn't need to ask. She could see it. The weight of his kingdom was gone from his shoulders. He was just Dario. "You did it," she whispered. "I did it. You gave it all away." "It was never mine," he said. "It was a cage. I finally found the key." He looked at her, his eyes full of a raw, quiet love that was more powerful than all his money and guns had ever been. "You," he said. "You were the key, Tessa." She went to him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her head resting on his chest. She felt his heart, steady and strong beneath her ear. He had burned his kingdom. He had done it for her, for them. "So," she said, her voice muffled by his sweater. "What now, Mr. Ventresca?" "Now," he said, his arms holding her tight. "Now, I believe you have a restaurant to open." The grand reopening of Carmela's was a statement. Tessa had insisted on the name. "It's for her," she'd said, "for what we lost." But the new Carmela's was not a dive bar. It was a bistro, warm, exposed brick, soft lighting, a gleaming copper bar. It was her. It was full of the smell of fresh bread, roasted garlic, and new beginnings. Tessa was a wreck, a beautiful, vibrating wreck, in a simple black dress, her hair pinned up, a chef's towel slung over her arm. She was in the kitchen, she was in the dining room, she was a chef. Dario sat at a small, dark table in the back corner. His arm was in a sling. The graze from the warehouse ambush had been deeper than he'd let on, and his physical therapist was strict. He was just watching her. His face, no longer hardened by war, was relaxed, a small, proud smile touching his lips every time she laughed. He was just a man, supporting his partner. Carmela was at the door, seating people, her eyes wet with happy, disbelieving tears. It was perfect, and then the door burst open. It wasn't a patron, it was the last Costigan, the older brother, the one who had escaped the federal net Dario had cast. He was wild-eyed, drunk, and grieving. He was holding a gun. "Ventresca," he roared, waving the gun. The bistro erupted in screams. People dove under tables. Dario was on his feet in an instant, pushing himself in front of the table, shielding nothing. The Costigan saw him. He laughed, a horrible, broken sound. You took my brother. You took everything." "It's over, Liam," Dario said, his voice calm, his good hand held up. "Put it down." "It's over when I say," Liam shrieked, and his eyes, mad and unfocused, found Tessa, who was frozen by the kitchen door. "You," he snarled. "It was you. You're the bitch who started all this. He did it all for you." "Liam," Dario said, his voice a low, cold command. "Don't." Liam raised the gun. He wasn't aiming at Dario. He was aiming at her. Dario moved. He was not a man with a bad arm. He was not a civilian. He was a force of nature. He crossed the 10 feet between them in a single, desperate lunge. He didn't have time to push her. He only had time to shield her. He slammed into her, his body a wall, covering her, his arms wrapping around her as he drove them both, to the floor behind the bar. The shot was deafening in the small room. It was followed by a moment of perfect, ringing silence. Tessa was on the floor, the smell of sawdust and spilled wine in her nose, Dario's crushing, solid weight on top of her. He had cried out, a sharp, guttural sound, a pained grunt that was cut short. "Dario?" she whispered. He didn't move. "Dario!" she screamed, pushing at him. He grunted and rolled off her, slumping against the bar. He was laughing. A pained, wheezing laugh. You idiot," she sobbed, her hands flying to his chest, looking for the blood. You idiot, you're hurt." "Tessa," he panted, his face pale, his teeth gritted in pain. Where is it? My other shoulder," he gasped. She looked. He was right. His left arm, the one that had been in the sling, was fine. His right shoulder was now a mess of dark, bleeding fabric. You You have to be the unluckiest man in the world, she cried, halfway between a sob and a laugh. Or the luckiest, he said. His eyes, clear and full of an insane, all-encompassing love, finding hers. You're okay, that's all. The sound of sirens, already close, filled the air. The police, who had, as part of Dario's deal, been providing discreet surveillance on the last Costigan, swarmed the bistro. Liam, sobbing and disarmed, was led away in handcuffs. It was, finally, over. Weeks later, the air was crisp. The smell of pine and damp earth had replaced the city's grime. Dario was recovering in a small, lakeside cabin, hundreds of miles from Clearhaven. His arm was, again, in a sling. He was sitting on the porch, staring at the water, which was a sheet of steel-gray glass in the dusk. He was at peace. Headlights cut through the twilight. Tessa's car, a practical, used hatchback, crunched on the gravel. She got out, a bag of groceries in her arms. She ran the bistro, Carmela's, which was the talk of the town, 4 days a week, and drove up here for the other 3. She joined him on the porch, dropping the groceries and sinking into the chair beside him. She was tired, the good tired, the chef tired. You missed a rush, she said, leaning her head on his good shoulder. Table of 6, 15 minutes to close. I almost killed them. But you fed them, he said, his voice a low, warm rumble. I fed them. She agreed. They sat in silence for a long time, just breathing. The past was behind them. The future was this. Tessa, he said, his voice quiet. She sat up. He had stood and was standing in front of her. He looked nervous. Dario Ventresca. Nervous. I wanted to build things, he said, fumbling in his pocket with his good hand. And I want to build this with you, properly. He pulled out a small velvet box. He couldn't kneel. He just opened it. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a statement. It was a single thin band of platinum, simple and unadorned. It's not a rich man's ring, he said, his voice thick. I'm not that man anymore, but I want to start over, completely, as equals, as just Dario and Tessa. She was crying, silent. Happy tears were tracing paths down her cheeks. Will you marry me, Tessa Morano? Will you build a life with me? She stood up. She touched his face, her thumb tracing the faint scar on his forehead from the warehouse. She looked at his new scar on his shoulder. From her bistro. She didn't say yes. She smiled. A slow, brilliant smile that lit up the dusk. She pulled his face down to hers and kissed him. A kiss that tasted of pine and hope and new beginnings. Guess rich men do know a few things after all. She whispered against his lips. He laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and pulled her into a warm, emotional embrace. They stood on the porch of their new life, the past a scar, the future unwritten, and the dusk settling quietly around them. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We're so grateful to have you here. Please, let us know where you're listening from. We love to see how far the stories travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to Mafia Romance Stories so you never miss a new part. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on Tessa and Dario's journey. So please, share your comments in English. We read every one. Until next time.